The 1800s were a time of many events that would shape America into the nation it is today. The time period we will be looking at will revolve around the Oregon Trail and the Texas Revolution, with a sprinkle of Mormon history in between. Between the years of 1840 and 1869, a large migration was occurring. Every year, thousands of people would make the journey across what was known as the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail started between 1842 and 1843, and was a nearly 2,000-mile trip to the river valleys of Oregon. Families would just pack up their important belongings and take their oxen and wagons to new adventures. Most of the people were men by 2 to 1, and many of the women that did go were essentially dragged there by their husbands. What possessed my husband anyway, that he should have thought of bringing us away through this God-forsaken country? The first migration was around a 1,000-person party. The next year was a little less than that, but the following year 3,000 people made the journey. The trail itself was mostly flat. Many of the obstacles they did come across came from the people, such as firearms accidentally going off, falling off horses, drowning when trying to cross the river, and disease. The land they passed through was mostly inhabited by Native Americans, so attacks by them were feared. Reaching the mountain provided even more challenges, and many thought of settling along the trail. Those that kept on made it to the fertile lands of Oregon, and the vast majority survived. Between 1840 and 1869, around 50,000 had made the 2,000-mile journey across this great American desert. The Oregon Trail opened a gateway to many new lands to settle. One group that benefited from that were the Mormons. Starting out of New York, they made their journey to find a new place to settle, going from Ohio, Missouri, and then Illinois, with a community of 15,000 people. Going off the teachings of their founder, Joseph Smith, before his arrest for treason against the state and his death on June of 1844 by a jail break-in. This event led to Brigham Young, Smith's successor, to lead his people westward towards the new trail. On July 24, 1847, they made it to the Great Salt Lake, their new home. Young governed Zion from 1850 to 1857. In 1852, troubles befell them with the authorizing of polygamy, or men being able to have multiple wives, the same reason for Smith's arrest. In 1857, Young gave up his power when conflict with the U.S. Army broke out in order to make peace with the government. I'm aware that the topic for the other two were brief. That's because we are now getting into the really interesting part, the Texas Revolution. The events leading up started with Mexico winning its independence from Spain in 1821. In 1819, the U.S. had denounced any claim to Texas with a treaty with Spain, but by the time it was ratified in 1821, Mexico was its own country. Around 80,000 Mexicans were living west of the 98th meridian. Mexico was looking to develop northern borderlands in Texas. Moses Austin was given a large land grant and tasked with settling American families into the Texas area since no Mexicans really wanted to. He established a colony of 300 families, the old 300 as they were called before his death in 1821. His son, Stephen F. Austin, had showed little interest in Texas, but after the death of his father, he took over the land grant and continued his father's work. Austin became known as the Father of Texas for establishing the first Americans in Texas, and later on he would be in full support of its independence. The families brought in were meant to become Mexican citizens and follow the Mexican rules, but they remained Americans at heart. There were also issues with the settlers breaking the law by bringing in slaves, and by 1835 there were just too many Americans in Texas. Around 30,000 of them, outnumbering Mexicans 6 to 1. Mexico tried their best to ban the immigration, but alas, the Americans had little contact with their Mexican neighbors living in the south and west of Texas. The Mexicans were actually called Tejanos, which is another word for Texans. Also happening in 1835, the new conservative national government of Mexico wanted to start enforcing its authority over the northern territories. In response, the Anglo-Americans and Tejanos banded together to protest to keep autonomy in their province. Mexico's response to them was to break them by force. One of their generals, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, had become a sort of dictator with no issue using violence to suppress dissent. The Texas Revolution started in October of that year, and on October 2nd, the Texans had won their first battle in Gonzales, making the Mexicans, led by Martin Perfecto de Cos, retreat to San Antonio. By mid-October, under the command of Austin, the growing Revolutionary Army began the siege of San Antonio. From there, they counterattacked at the Battle of Concepcion on October 28th, and won the grass fight on November 26, west of San Antonio. By December 11, Cos surrendered, and the Mexican forces withdrew south of the Rio Grande. Perhaps using revenge for Cos' embarrassment as a motive, Santa Anna led an attack on the Alamo on February 23rd. Leading up to the event, William B. Travis sent out a letter asking for support from Texans and Americans, but by the time the battle was underway, only 30 extra troops had arrived. The Alamo defenders were greatly outnumbered by the Mexicans, and all 187 of its defenders perished, 2 of them being the famous James Bowie, a commander of the greatest contingent of defenders, and Davy Cotlet, a legendary frontiersman and one-time Tennessee congressman. On March 6, 1836, Santa Anna had captured the Alamo. On March 19th, they had killed over 300 men after they surrendered at Goliad. The Texans were beyond angered. This time under the command of Sam Houston, Texas swarmed rallying to the cry, "Remember the Alamo!" And a month later, with the help of volunteers coming from the southern USA, Houston's army grew enough to rout a larger Mexican force on the San Jacinto River, near present-day Houston, and capture Santa Anna. Once captured, Santa Anna signed a treaty granting Texas its independence. And on March of 1836, in a village named Washington, delegates from across Texas declared Texas an independent republic and created a constitution modeled after the U.S. Constitution. Sam Houston was made president and petitioned for annexation to the United States. In the end, it took less than 7 months for Texas to gain its independence. Mexico later tried to take back the treaty, but they weren't strong enough to reestablish authority north of the Nueces River. So in conclusion, don't mess with Texas. Hope you enjoyed the lesson on these events. Although each had different goals, they were all connected thanks to the Oregon Trail. Had Americans not started traveling the 2,000 miles, there probably wouldn't have been as much support for Texas, and the Mormons would have had a much harder time finding a place to settle. Each helped play its role in shaping America into what it is today, and that's what makes each so important. I hope I have inspired you to try and learn more about each of these events and maybe sparked your interest in learning about anything to happen after. There's still so much to tell, but I think for now this is enough. Enjoy the rest of your day.